Welcome to the Dynamic Duo Show, where we talk all things superheroes and superhero movie related in an unbiased and honest way. I'm Franz.
I'm Kevin. Welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So yeah, we talk about all kinds of different things on this show. And I think today's topic is going to be a very interesting and important one. And let me ask for your forgiveness ahead of time because I may drone on a little bit because I've been thinking about this subject for quite a while, and I've got quite a bit to say. So if I take too much time, please forgive me ahead of time.
I have to ask for the same line of forgiveness, as it were. I've been thinking about this quite a bit.
And the topic at hand is we're getting into the current events, and we're talking about what's happening right now in the industry, and specifically about the Batwoman, the changes in Batwoman that have occurred, the fact that they've made her a black woman, and it's a very complicated question, really. It's a really complicated issue because it raises other questions. Like, for example, are we talking about Batwoman in particular, or are we talking about the changes that have been taking place in the cinematic verse of sort of diversifying characters and including minorities and changing what was there to be more inclusive? And so it becomes a very, very interesting topic. So the question becomes, who goes first?
You can open. I generally do, but this time I defer back to you.
I appreciate that, my friend. As I said, I've been thinking about this. So, as I said, it's a very complicated topic to me, because my initial reaction as a fan is that I don't like these changes. And I don't like them for a very specific reason. And the reason I don't like them is because I'm a purist. And as a purist, I have a particular affinity for the characters that I've grown to know and to love. And so when these characters are changed, it affects my connection and my relationship to the characters. And I happen to think that it's not an easy thing to create a character or a work of art that stands the test of time, that has a connection to the public, that is magical, is the word that I tend to use. And so I hate when modern creators come in and presume to want to improve on it. But as I hate these changes, it's important for me to know that as a purist, I am not objecting to the ethnic and or racial changes. I'm referring to changes in general. So I was and am upset that as much as I love Hugh Jackman as an actor, I don't know the man personally, but as much as I love him as an actor, and as much as I appreciate his portrayal of Wolverine, I was as upset that they made Wolverine a 6'3" guy as opposed to the 5'2" guy that he actually is. I'm as upset when they made the X-Men black leather wearing people as opposed to who they were. I'm as upset when they changed Captain America's costume for something less. I'm as upset with Tom Holland's, for example, Spider-Man, as I am over Mary Jane's change. And so what I'd like to do is challenge the people who have been irate and upset over the ethnic and racial changes and not so much about the other changes. I'd like you to challenge you to think about what that means, to think about how that happened, and to understand the racial aspect in that feeling. See what I mean? Because most people don't understand how racism works. And most people perceive racism as you have to be some sort of, Ku Klux Klan, white supremacist, I hate black people, Asians and Jews, some extremists to be racist. Whereas true racism, at least the racism, and certainly those people exist, but true racism is much more subtle. It's much more unconscious. And so I'd like people who have been irate over the changes, but over the ethnic changes, but not so much about the other changes, which are more dramatic, to think about how they themselves were impacted by their racial subconscious bias. And to understand that that bias has an impact on society and it has an impact on people. The truth of the matter is that we have a decision to make, and you have a decision to make. And the decision is whether or not you're going to be a good person, whether you're going to be someone who falls on the side of Superman or Lex Luthor, whether you're the type of person who wants to fight for equality, for justice, for fairness for everyone, or the type of person who says, you know what, I don't care about anybody else as long as mine is protected. You have to make that decision. And if you make the decision that, hey, it's just about me, well, that's your prerogative. And it is your decision. But own it, stand up to it, and be proud of it. It's a decision that I would ask you to consider, because sometimes what comes around goes around. I'd ask you to think about it very, very carefully, but it's a decision that you have to make nonetheless, whether or not you're going to stand on the side of justice and fairness. Because here's what you need to understand. You see, I get how some of you are feeling. Contrary to popular belief, I get how some of you are feeling. I should, because I get it. I've been there. You know, many of you, it isn't about the fact that you hate minorities or you hate Black people. Many of you feel like you're being erased, right? That you're not being heard. Many of you feel like this stuff is being shoved down your throats, and you have a visceral sort of reaction, rejection of that forced ideology being put upon you. And I kind of get that. But here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about the fact that your identity, the identity that's made you so upset, has been occurring. That change of your identity, the change in the characters that you've loved, has been occurring for what, the past 10 years, 15 years tops? And it's affected how many? Like maybe 10% of the characters that you love? And I want you to think about how that 10%, 15 years has affected you. And if you choose to be on the side of the right person, if you choose to be on the side of justice and fairness, I want you to empathize how we might feel about the subject, where it's 90% misrepresentation or underrepresentation over the past 50, over the past 60, 100, 200, 300 years. And if you can just empathize that feeling, then you could understand where we're coming from. You see, you guys sometimes attack the so-called social justice warriors as evil people who are trying to, you're even calling them fascist. But maybe those are the people who have basically recognized the inequity, the inherent inequity that's been taking place, and they're just trying to recreate a balance in society that's fair for everyone. I don't like the term white privilege because that term implies that by being white, you're automatically wealthy or rich, or you can get your way, and that's not true. It's not fair. There are too many white people who are struggling, too many white families who are struggling to pay the bills, too many white families who are living in lower income communities, too many white families who are basically without, for me to say there's white privilege. Having said that, there is white privilege, and it's a white privilege that you may not understand. It's a white privilege that you may take for granted. I don't want to use that term because of the connotations of it, but here's what I want you to consider. You take for granted that Superman is white. You take for granted that Spider-Man, Thor, Captain America, and all these people are white. Let me give you my personal experience. My personal experience as a comic book guy, as a guy who loves Captain America and Superman and Batman and Thor. Thor is my favorite. I mean, Spider-Man's my favorite. But when I first read the Spider-Man comic with Luke Cage in it, it impacted me. It impacted me in a way that at the time, as a young boy, a young man, I didn't understand. I just had a connection to the character that I, at the time, didn't associate with race. It wasn't that. It's many, many years later that I realized, oh my God, my connection to that character was because it was the first time that I had seen myself in the pages of the comic book. What's interesting is that I still rooted for Spider-Man to kick his butt, but that that character had a significant impact in seeing myself You see, you take that for granted because that's just the way it has been for you. But when something is lacking, that's when you appreciate its value.
Mm-hmm.
And the reaction that you guys are having now for the 10% change, just imagine what that reaction is for us that have been 90, 95% without. See what I mean? And I, I want you to consider that it's not about wiping away your existence. It's not about doing away with your heritage or your ideology. It's about inclusivity. It's about whether or not, as a white person, you want an Asian boy or a gay boy or a Hispanic boy or a Mexican boy. And I say boy, that's another unconscious bias, boy and or girl. I want you to really think about that. Whether you want them to have that same experience, whether you want them to have the same experience of that you have taken for granted of seeing yourself everywhere you are, everywhere you're represented. That's all it is. It's just a matter of having that experience. You may think that the so-called social justice warriors are overreacting, that they're demanding too much. And you know what? You may be right. In some cases, you may be right. But here's what I want you to consider. Haven't you overreacted? I mean, I've seen the reaction on the internet. I've seen the vitriol. I've seen the anger. I've seen the animosity that comes from the attacks on the so-called social justice warriors and how evil they are. Isn't that an overreaction? And aren't you overreacting because your identity is being threatened? And again, for those of you who are choosing to be on the side of truth and the side of justice and fairness and equal, don't you now understand why perhaps these social justice warriors are so-called overreacting? And don't you also understand that sometimes you have to scream to be heard? You need to understand that sometimes you have to scream to be heard. Aren't you screaming? Isn't the internet blowing up over these changes? You're screaming because you want to be heard. Well, that's what's happening from the other side as well, from our side as well. The difference being is that your changes are 10 years old. Our changes have been the reality for the past, since the inception of this country. So do you understand the scream? And sometimes you have to shoot for the stars and get the moon. So perhaps you might be, in a particular instance, you might be right that this particular change was inappropriate. I get that. I really do. But what I'd like you to do is consider the context in which that change is taking place, the context in which the people are asking for that change to be taking place, and to essentially make a decision of where do you want to fall. Do you want to fall on the side of justice, of equality for all, of everyone being able to enjoy the things that you may be enjoying in a way that you don't even appreciate? Or whether you want to fall on the side of, I don't give a blank about them as long as I get mine. And that's where I am. So to answer the question directly, whether or not Batwoman is the right choice or whether or not the changes are the right choices, for me, Kevin, it falls under each specific case. There are some cases to me that is perfectly justified, and there are some cases where it's horrifying and it's absolutely wrong, and I'm against it and I disagree with it. So in the case of Batwoman, it's not a replacement. Here are the things that I fault. I hate when the characters are changed into something they're not. As I said earlier, each character is a very precious and special thing. And we don't know exactly what aspect of the character makes them that special. So therefore, my philosophy is don't change it. Leave it what it is. It does create a dilemma that there are not many minorities within the media in general, within the comic book world in specific. And we may work together to try to resolve how we correct that. It's not always make Spider-Man black. It's not always make Thor black or a woman or the case may be. That's not necessarily the right way. But the only thing I would ask you to consider is, as you are upset that these changes are taking place, decide whether or not you want to work together to have that inclusivity and let's figure it all out together, or to say, nope, I'm just going to hate, and I'm just going to attack anyone who wants diversity, and I'm going to accuse them of being social justice warriors, and you can all go to hell for all I care. So that's my thought on the issue, Kevin, and I don't know if it makes sense to you, but I'm very curious to see what you think about it.
Everything you just said makes 100% sense. My take on the whole change thing is literally what you have just conveyed yourself. I have no problem with the changes, even for some of the classic characters, if the change makes sense within the context of what you're doing. And within those changes, my biggest question for a lot of this, for a lot of it, has been, is this being done because it's the flavor of the month and it's the hot topic of the moment? Or are you doing this whether it's a situation where a character is being made gay, or the character's ethnicity is being changed? Is it being done because you're trying to advance your story and advance the storytelling and what this is all about? Or are you doing it just to cave into the media and the public at the moment? In my view of this, if you're caving to the public at the moment, it's not going to last. It will not hold up. Most things, when it comes down to public reaction, like what we're seeing now, it has a burnout point. And when that burnout point hits, and let's say the Batwoman character is pushed to the back, or Miles Morales, the Black Superman, Black
Iron Man.
is pushed to the side, or John Stewart, the Green Lantern, becomes pushed to the side, what do you do then? How do you handle that within the case of what you're doing? Again, not repeating myself, but it still comes down to, are you doing it because it's a hot thing of the moment, or are you doing it because you want to make the changes and have the changes make sense? In terms of diversity and what have you, and with myself being disabled, and I've always loved Marvel for what they've done with both Daredevil and Professor Xavier.
Exactly.
But I must be honest, when it comes down to disabled representation within comics, it doesn't exist. You have Daredevil and you have Professor Xavier, but only to a point with Professor Xavier. Because when you get right down to it, the only reason why he's in the wheelchair is because the mutant powers that they've given him have taken away his ability to walk. That's not a true disability in the sense of the way that cerebral palsy or spina bifida exists.
Mm-hmm.
My thing is, within that stretch, as far as whether a character is gay, disabled, straight, white, black, whatever the case may be, what does it mean? Changes or not, if you're not progressing what you're creating, it's all for naught. It's all for nothing. Your readers will break off eventually and leave you. The television audience will leave you. Case in point, if I may, even though this is not about comic books, if you watch The Big Bang Theory, Jim Parsons, the gentleman who played Sheldon, is gay. CBS, Chuck Lorre, and the people responsible for that show never really talked about that. in my opinion, the reason why they didn't is because they didn't have to. Jim Parsons is a fantastic actor. They gave him a girlfriend on the show, and the chemistry between he and Mayim Bialik was outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
Sheldon continued to be entertaining. The rest of the cast remained entertaining. It did not matter that in his private life, the man was gay. And personally, I think that when it comes down to a lot of the production offices, directors, and creators of these things, they're kind of going off the edge. Not saying that you can't have a gay actor involved, or that the character can't be black, or the character can't be Asian or Hispanic. But make sure that when you do this, that the person you hire is talented enough to get you through, and that the individual can fit the bill for what you're trying to convey. I think in a lot of cases, they get so carried away with the idea of, oh, we're getting ready to involve a gay character, so the person that we hire has to be gay. To me, they're not mutually exclusive. If you're an actor and you know how to act, fine. Case in point for myself, Taye Diggs is getting ready to play Teddy Pendergrass in a biopic. Taye Diggs is not disabled. Now, I'm sure they could scour the planet to try to find someone who is handicapped to play Teddy Pendergrass. But at the same time, if you do this, does that mean that the person in front of the camera can actually act and carry off what you're trying to convey? That's up for conjecture all the way around. That doesn't mean that just because you've gotten a gay actress or a gay actor in front of your camera that it's going to work. That's why I wonder if a lot of this is simply pandering to the public's outcry. Not that the public's outcry isn't important, and it has its place, but at the same time, it's a why and what do we do from here?
Yeah.
That's my take.
That's brilliant, my friend. And as with you, I agree 100% with everything that you've said. It's a very complicated issue. It's a very complicated issue. And as the listeners, the viewers may get, like, we don't just fall on the side of one or the other. We are understanding the nuances of that issue. And we recognize that at times the so-called general public, the demands are too extreme. And I absolutely agree with you. I absolutely agree with you that you don't have to be disabled to play a disabled character, particularly if that's going to hurt the delivery of the issue, of the subject, of the movie, or of the topic. And certainly we also disagree that making the changes for the sake of the change is hurtful. It ultimately doesn't work because it's not natural, it's not pure, it's not wholesome, and it doesn't have that. It's going to most likely lack the magic that makes us stick with it. That's the reality. The other side of the reality is that, does that mean we don't hire disabled actors, or does that mean that we just stick to Superman and as a white person, and Spider-Man and Thor and Captain and all the other ones? What does it mean? How do we resolve it? It's a complicated issue. And I think what you said is exactly right. I think the effort has to be there to be more exclusive, and it has to be done in a more organic, natural way. Having said that, that's a very difficult thing to do. It's a difficult thing to create a new Spider-Man It's
Uh-huh.
a difficult thing to create a new Superman. It is. It's not easy. There are
Yes.
thousands and thousands of superhero characters that are created every day that don't appeal. So it's a complicated issue. I'd like to give one more example before we end, and we're sort of running out of time, of the complexity of racism. Again,
Okay.
racism not being the I hate minorities racism, but the subtle unconscious biases that we have. You know, when you think about Image Comics, to me, Image Comics was a fascinating experiment because you had new young creators who were clearly progressive, and their goal was to create the next Marvel. They wanted to be the third option, you know, DC, Marvel, and Image comic books.
Yes.
And they took a brave stance. They made the Superman of that character, of that universe, a black man. Spawn, the lead character, is a black man. And they included minority and black characters. And by the way, let me just emphasize this. You're absolutely right. We need that representation because as a person, as a black man, I want you to feel what I felt as a handicapped person, you know, and so as a disabled person. So anyway, so they did that for the racial aspect. They included major characters in Savage Dragon, and there were major black characters in Young Blood. But think about this: Spawn was a man who sold his soul to the devil and was a homeless superhero, homeless person. Now think about the unconscious bias that it took place. Think about the extreme. Have you ever heard of a homeless superhero before, of a bum superhero? Have you ever heard of a superhero who sold his soul to the devil? And yet in McFarlane's unconscious mind, while he was doing, and by the way, I applaud and I thank McFarlane for the effort that he did, but subconsciously, unconsciously, as a black man, he had to be a bum. Savage Dragon, his girlfriend, which is a major character, was a black woman, but she was a prostitute. Think about the last time there was a prostitute character and a superhero genre, comic book. Same thing with Youngblood. I forget exactly the details, but he was another horrible, horrible character with a horrible background. Luke Cage from the pages of Marvel comic books was a guy who was an ex-con.
Right.
So think about unconscious bias and try to understand how it affects your decision in terms of choosing between two equally qualified people, or perhaps someone more qualified. And when you're seeing a black and a white person and you're making that decision, think about how it affects us. And again, ultimately, make the decision whether or not you want to be on the side of truth and equality and justice, the side of Superman or the side of Lex Luthor. And if you're religious, the side of Christ and the side of Lucifer.
Yes,
you know,
sir.
make that decision. And once you do, then we become a community and we can figure it out together. We can figure it out in such a way that it doesn't ruin and change Superman because he's a valid character that should not be affected. It doesn't change it in a way that affects your identity as a white person or you know, whatever. But at the same time, it makes other people feel included, feel worthwhile. Let's figure it out together. You know, a lot of times, Kevin, what happens is we talk at each other and we come at each other. And if you're on the left, you automatically assume the right is evil and wrong, and you must be a racist person who hates me and wants to put me down. And if you're on the right, you look at the left like, you know, I don't know where they come up with the fascist idea. Let's decide whether or not we want to be humans, and let's decide what type of humans we want to be.
Yes.
And let's figure it all out together. And I think that's the overall message for the show.
Exactly.